But I thought I'd start by telling you about one day in Somalia, just one day that I spent in Somalia. And maybe I should say, actually, it was a day in two Somalias. It was in 2011, and I took a plane from Nairobi to Mogadishu. And Mogadishu at that time was still occupied, apart from the airport and a tiny part of the city, a sort of hill where the government was. It was occupied by Al-Shabaab, and it was a city of front lines. It was a city of warfare so horrible that people were even firing sort of anti-aircraft missiles down streets. It was an unspeakable form of violence that was going on in Mogadishu at that time. And I arrived at the airport, and there was a woman on the plane who was an extremely glamorous woman dressed in white. And she wanted me to go with her right into the heart of the city. And she said, really, it will be fine, because when I go into the heart of the city, even though I'm from there, I put on my black niqab, my black gloves, my black socks, my black everything. So you can come with me and no one will even know that you're a white person. But I wasn't brave or stupid enough to do so. But anyway, I was there for a while, and it's a terrifying place to be. And then I took the plane from Mogadishu airport to another part of Somalia, which declared itself independent in 1991. It's called Somaliland. It hasn't been recognised internationally, but it's a sort of the land that the world forgot. And what was so surreal is that just an hour and a half after being in that city, I landed in a place called Berbera, a port city. And it's by the sea. And we went for a walk by the sea, and there, sort of totally not aware of us at all, were these girls, like, playing in a pool by the sea. They were teenagers. And not only were they sort of frolicking in the water and rolling around, they weren't even wearing headscarves. I could see their bare legs. They were just tumbling around in the water, and I was just like, I've just been in a city where women have to even cover their hands and their feet. In fact, one friend of mine had thick black socks on in Mogadishu, and she was told they're not thick enough. She was told off by her family. And suddenly I'm seeing these girls who are, not naked, but they were just so free, and it was just such an extraordinary thing. And then I went from there, I drove to the capital, Hargeisa, which I had last visited in 1994. And there was a funny parallel today when I was walking around the cathedral, and I saw a picture on the wall, and it had I don't know whether they were twin cities, but there were lots of cities that had been bombed, and it had Coventry, and then it had Dresden. And I just thought to myself, Hargeisa in Somaliland was known as the Dresden of Africa, because there was not, when I first visited that city in 1994, there was not one roof left. It was a city of rubble that had been destroyed by planes that took off from its own airport. There was a civil war. And they used to take off from the airport on the hill and circle around and just bomb the city. So there was nothing there. It was the worst thing. I've been all over Africa to the worst of the worst places. I've never seen anything like Hargeisa. And when I went back there, 17 years later, I stood on the hill near to the airport. We arrived like that. And I looked down, and this city that I had seen only as stones was this huge city that had been built. There were glittering roofs. It was a city, I was told, of 1 million people. I don't know whether that's true. It was chaotic, but it was a city, and it was completely peaceful. And I suppose that was the time when I became sick at myself as a journalist, and sick, as you said, of all the journalists that tell the story of Nigeria as Boko Haram and corruption, that tell the story of Somalia as, well, Somalia had all the ingredients because it had famine, disease, endless conflict, terrorism, and even like the added ingredient of pirates. But Somaliland was a place that none of those things applied. So I thought, I have to tell a different story, but you can't do that in journalism. You have to fight because they only want the other story. So I wrote a book, basically. And that evening when I was in Hargeisa, I went to the hotel, and there were couples, or men and women, and they greet each other there. They're quite conservative, but they greet each other by kissing each other's hands, and there's a sort of air of mild flirtation. And on that day was the day that Al-Shabaab had banned men and women from shaking hands. And I thought, this is completely crazy. Just, in one part of the country, they're not allowed to even shake hands. Here, they're kissing each other's hands. And there was something romantic about it. And it was just, I started to ask, how? How did this happen? How did Somaliland, the territory that the world forgot, on its own, form some kind of functioning polity? It's not a recognised country. And it did that because Somaliland was sort of left to its own devices, and the Somalis came amongst themselves and they fought for a while, and then they spoke for years, and they had endless conferences, and they sort of developed a hybrid system of Somali clan politics, which they mixed with a more Western-style democracy. And Somaliland now has incredibly competitive elections. I think it's the most sort of free and fair democracy in not only the Horn of Africa, but the East Africa. You look at Kenya, places like that. The opposition can't win because they cheat. In Somaliland, the opposition wins, even if it's by a matter of 20 or 30 votes. And then if you compare that with Somalia is the land of the most spectacular amount of outside interference that it's been going on for so long. Somalia is a hostage to outsiders, and it's like the Somalis, they're brilliant at manipulating the outsiders, and they exploit outsiders, but it's a place that has just been infantilized. And so the contrast between those two Somalias is something that is just so astonishing. I think there are lots and lots of lessons that can be learned. And I just wanted to bring up a couple more things. There was something that you said about dialogue, and it made me think dialogue with Boko Haram, and it made me think about Al-Shabaab, because I have the fortune or the misfortune to speak to Al-Shabaab frequently, because I'm one of the journalists that writes a lot about Somalia, and now Somali journalists have been banned from using the word Al-Shabaab, let alone speaking to Al-Shabaab. They get arrested if they do that in Somalia. So now I'm Al-Shabaab's first port of call. And I've developed, it's a strange thing to say, but I have developed relationships with these people who I speak to on the phone all the time. And what's so peculiar about it is that, like you said, they're not animals. And they're not. They care about me. And it was a funny thing when I went to Nigeria last year to make a program about piracy in the sea. I said to them, I'm not going to be in the UK, so my UK number won't answer. So where are you going? I said, I'm going to Nigeria. And this Al-Shabaab gentleman said to me, you mustn't go to Nigeria, it's so dangerous. and you call me when you get back, you'll come to great harm, it's a terrible country. So on one level, there's an immense humanity. But then on another level, and this is where I'd love to seek other people's thoughts on it, if I ask Al-Shabaab, how can you have gone to a bus in Kenya and taken out the men, the women, their teachers, and you slit each one of their throats? Like, how can you justify that? And then they go into this bizarre sort of, it's like they're preaching. It's like, these people, it's their fault, they voted in the infidel government of Kenya, which declared war on us. If they hadn't voted in that government, there's this bizarre logic, and for them it makes perfect sense. And I just don't know how you because whenever I try to interfere with that, they become very, very angry with me. And it's like I'm not allowed to stop them until they've reached their sort of perfect conclusion. So that's just something I'll leave hanging in the air. And I just wanted to end by, when I was, before lunch, I went for a walk to get some fresh air. And I walked through the ruins of the cathedral, and it was totally overwhelming because it was the most surreal thing. The only other place I have walked through the ruins of a cathedral, and it was chilling how similar it was, is in Mogadishu. There is an exquisite Catholic cathedral there, whose last archbishop, or he was gunned down in the church, okay? And it's a carcass of a cathedral like that one. And it was like I was just overwhelmed with the similarity, because I suppose they're all the same shape, actually. And then I saw these children all these school children ran into the cathedral here because they, I don't know, learning something, and they were joyous and they were dancing around. And there were some Somali children in this group of school children just now, an hour ago. And it just made me think, in that other cathedral, there were some children. And I was in there. It was I didn't feel scared there. I always have 6 bodyguards, but, it's quite peaceful in that cathedral in Mogadishu, but lots and lots of displaced people live in and around it, and it's very, very, very sad. And then suddenly I heard this laughter, like tinkling of laughter, and in the corner there were these 2 little boys in this cathedral in Mogadishu, like completely naked, and they were pouring water, like with those yellow plastic jerry cans I'm sure you've seen, kind of washing themselves. And so we went and spoke to them. It's like, what are you doing? And they said, well, we live here. They lived. They had no parents. They were feral children. But they lived in that cathedral. And I suppose they were safer there than anywhere else in Mogadishu. But it was just quite a strange experience for me to be in this city, which has left that. And I always think Mogadishu should leave some of those carcasses so people remember, if it ever gets the chance to actually rebuild itself so it's not going to be smashed up again. And I don't know when that will happen. So thank you very much.